In 1948, the Arabs announced to the world that they're going to wipe out this new state, and they lose. And they lose on a massive scale. 7 Arab armies lose to a bunch of ragtag Jews who barely know how to fight. Many of them just come from the Holocaust, survivors of the Holocaust. And yet they lose on the world stage. And I would say that, you know, the Arabs, in particular the Palestinians, often use this expression, the Nakba, the catastrophe, to refer to what happened in 1948. And generally what they mean by it, or what they intend to mean by it, is the disaster that befell the Palestinians in 1948 as a result of this war. And originally when they used that, they used it to describe the way in which Arab elites had started the war and failed the Palestinians. So initially the term Nakba was used by Palestinians to criticize the Arabs, the Arab elites. Now it's used to criticize Israel, and, you know, they say their claim is that 600,000 or 800,000 refugees were driven out of Israel by the Israelis and so on. Obviously, the historical record's more complicated than that, but that's their narrative. I think what really is going on with the Nakba is that it was an utter humiliation for the entire Arab world, including the Palestinians, and certainly for the Palestinian leadership. That it was the equivalent of somebody who considered themselves a world-class athlete being beaten by a girl. And in fact, being beaten by a girl, you know, who was wearing high heels or something. I mean, you know, just, it was a total catastrophe. And one of the ways they responded to that was to kick the Jews out of the Arab world. So the Iraqis, the Yemenis, the Taimanis, the Egyptians didn't do that. They did it in '67. But throughout the Arab world, the Syrians and so on, throughout the Arab world, all across North Africa, Jews were kicked out, and probably somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million Jews were kicked out of the Arab world. And it was an act of vengeance. It was an act of, we have been defeated, we are furious, and we will strike wherever we can. And of course, these Jewish populations were enormously vulnerable. So you have a number of pogroms, and then by and large, the Jews flee, leaving everything behind and so on. Again, it's important to understand that this issue of the humiliation of the existence of Israel has a double meaning. On the one hand, it's got this meaning that I just described, which you could argue is a sort of cultural meaning, the Jews against the Arabs, and it's a war, and the Arabs lost, and so on. But it's also a religious issue. Part of the self-image that Muslims have of themselves is that they are a religion that should dominate. And certainly it should dominate in what they consider Dar al-Islam. And Israel is right in the heart of Dar al-Islam. This has been part of the Muslim world since a generation after the Prophet died, even less than a generation. And it's always, with the exception of the Christian Crusaders for a brief period, it's always been in possession of the Muslims, and the Jews have always been dhimmi. So to have the Jews establish an autonomous state in the heart of Dar al-Islam, for there to be sovereign Jews in Dar al-Islam, is an unbelievable insult to Islam, at least to the form of Islam that believes that it must dominate. Certainly dominate in Dar al-Islam, and then of course everything should be Dar al-Islam, so they should dominate. And that, I think, lies at the heart of the rejection. So I mentioned earlier the whole issue of Camp David and Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat could not say yes to Camp David. He could not openly acknowledge that the Jews were here to stay. He would have been giving up the last shred of Arab honor in this matter. And as he put it, when somebody once said to him, "Why didn't you say yes?" "What, you want me to be drinking tea with Sadat?" And that's what happened to Sadat. Sadat made peace with the Israelis, and he was assassinated. And he was assassinated by radical Muslims who, in fact, are part of the jihad that we're now dealing with today. So as a result, you've got a situation where, as far as the Muslims are concerned, it is a zero-sum conflict with Israel. There's no way that it can be resolved except by the elimination of Israel, which is itself a profound humiliation. It is a blackening of the face of Islam. It's a blasphemy against Allah, and only its disappearance can solve that. And I'm not saying there aren't Muslims who would like to say, look, let's get over this stuff and get on with our lives. And in fact, Israel can be a good neighbor, and we can acquire many things through the Israelis without going to the Europeans and so on. And there were Muslims who were saying that from the beginning of the Zionist movement. But the most violent and the most radical are the ones who must defend the honor of Islam. And in their mind, people who are Muslims who are willing to compromise are pretty much apostates. They have abandoned the true religion of Islam, and they deserve to die just as much as the Jews do. So I got to say, it's a very difficult situation. And again, to get back to this issue of cognitive egocentrism, it does not help us to find solutions to this problem by pretending that this is not the way they view things. And this is not, in particular, this is not the way their leadership views things.